What happens when America's most beloved late-night host goes head-to-head with one of the most controversial figures in modern royalty? You won't believe what unfolds when a simple promotional appearance turns into an absolute train wreck that has the entire internet buzzing. Last night's episode of The Late Show with Stephen Colbert delivered the kind of explosive television that hasn't been seen in years, and by the end of it, security was being called to escort Meghan Markle off the set after she completely lost control during what can only be described as one of the most dramatic meltdowns in talk show history. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds. This confrontation had everything: accusations flying, voices raised, and a guest who clearly came prepared for war rather than a friendly chat about her latest projects. The tension was palpable from the moment Meghan Markle walked onto the Ed Sullivan Theatre stage. Those familiar with Colbert's interviewing style know he's never been one to shy away from tough questions. But what happened last night went far beyond his usual satirical jabs. The Duchess of Sussex arrived supposedly to promote her new Netflix documentary series, but it became crystal clear within minutes that she had an entirely different agenda, one that would ultimately backfire in the most spectacular fashion possible. From the opening moments, something felt off. Colbert's usual warm welcome seemed strained, and Markle's body language was defensive before he'd even asked his first question. The studio audience, initially excited to see the former royal, quickly picked up on the uncomfortable energy radiating from the interview chair. You could practically cut the tension with a knife, as both host and guest sized each other up like prize fighters entering the ring. "So, Meghan, welcome back to The Late Show," Colbert began with his characteristic smile, though those paying attention could detect something sharper underneath. "I have to say, it's been quite a year for you and Harry. How are you both holding up with all the, let's call them family dynamics, that keep making headlines?" The question itself wasn't particularly aggressive. Vintage Colbert, really. But Markle's reaction was immediate and telling. Her jaw tightened, her posture straightened, and for just a moment, the carefully crafted media persona slipped to reveal something much more combative underneath. "Stephen, I think that's exactly the kind of question that shows how the media continues to perpetuate harmful narratives," she replied, her voice carrying an edge that hadn't been there during her entrance. "I came here to talk about important work, about the documentary that highlights issues affecting millions of women, and immediately, we're being dragged back into tabloid territory." The audience shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't the playful back and forth they'd come to expect from Colbert's celebrity interviews. This felt personal, loaded with months or perhaps years of accumulated frustration from both parties. Colbert, to his credit, didn't back down. If anything, Markle's defensive response seemed to energize him. "Well, I appreciate that. But you have to understand that when you and Harry give interviews about family members, when you make very public statements about your experiences, that becomes part of the conversation. You can't really cherry-pick which parts of your public life people are allowed to discuss." "Cherry-pick?" Markle's voice rose slightly, and for the first time, genuine anger flashed across her face. "Is that what you think we're doing? Cherry-picking our trauma for entertainment value?" The word trauma hung in the air like a challenge. Colbert's eyebrows raised almost imperceptibly, a tell that regular viewers know means he's about to go for the jugular with his next question. The studio had gone completely silent, except for the low hum of cameras capturing every micro-expression, every pregnant pause. "Look, I think everyone has sympathy for difficult family situations," Colbert continued, his tone still measured but with an undertone that suggested he wasn't buying what she was selling. "But you've built a brand around being the victims of circumstances that, frankly, a lot of people see differently. You left the royal family, moved to California, signed massive deals with Netflix and Spotify, and then spent considerable time publicly criticizing the very institution that gave you the platform to do all of this. Some people might call that having your cake and eating it too." The accusation hit like a thunderbolt. Markle's carefully maintained composure cracked visibly, her media training warring with what appeared to be genuine outrage. Her hands clenched in her lap, and when she spoke, her voice carried a tremor that could have been either fury or hurt, possibly both. "That is absolutely fucking ridiculous," she snapped, the profanity catching both the audience and Colbert completely off guard. "You have no idea what we've been through, what we've had to endure. We didn't leave because we wanted to. We left because we had to protect our family from an institution that was actively working against us." The F-bomb had clearly not been planned, and you could see the immediate regret flash across her face even as the words continued to pour out. But there was no taking it back now, and the damage was already spreading across social media in real time as viewers began posting clips and reactions. Colbert leaned back slightly, his expression a mixture of surprise and something that might have been satisfaction. He'd clearly struck a nerve, and like any skilled interviewer, he wasn't about to let the moment pass. But what happened next would transform this from an uncomfortable interview into television history, setting the stage for a confrontation that would have everyone talking for weeks to come. The silence that followed Markle's outburst stretched for what felt like an eternity. You could practically hear the collective intake of breath from the studio audience, many of whom were probably wondering if they'd just witnessed a career-ending moment. But if anyone thought this was rock bottom, they were about to be proven devastatingly wrong. Colbert's response came with the precision of a surgeon wielding a scalpel. "Well, I think we just saw the real Meghan Markle there for a moment," he said, his voice dripping with barely contained amusement. "And I have to say, it's refreshing to see someone drop the carefully rehearsed victim narrative, even if it's just for a few seconds." The words hit Markle like a physical blow. Her face flushed crimson, and for a moment it looked like she might actually get up and leave right then and there. Instead, she leaned forward, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper that somehow carried more menace than shouting would have. "Victim narrative? You think this is a fucking game, Stephen? You think we're sitting here playing victim for your entertainment and your ratings?" Her composure was unraveling in real time, each word more venomous than the last. "We're talking about death threats against our children. We're talking about a family that was willing to throw us to the wolves to protect their precious reputation." The audience was completely silent now, transfixed by the raw emotion pouring out of the woman who had always seemed so controlled in previous media appearances. This wasn't the polished duchess they'd seen in other interviews. This was someone pushed far beyond their breaking point. But Colbert wasn't backing down. If anything, her increasingly unhinged responses seemed to fuel his determination to push even harder. "Meghan, with all due respect, you've made millions of dollars talking about how badly you were treated. You've turned your grievances into a cottage industry. At what point does legitimate criticism become fair game?" "Fair game?" Markle's voice cracked with incredulity. "You want to talk about fair game? Let's talk about how your precious royal family, the ones you Americans seem to worship from afar, let their own press machine destroy a pregnant woman. Let's talk about how they were perfectly happy to watch me be torn apart in the media as long as it meant protecting their golden boy William and his precious wife." The mention of William and Catherine sent a visible ripple through the audience. Even for those who had followed the royal drama closely, hearing such direct accusations delivered with such venom was shocking. But Markle was just getting started, and her voice grew stronger and more accusatory with each word. "You sit there in your ivory tower, making jokes about our pain, but you have no fucking clue what it's like to have an entire institution working against you," she continued, her hands gesturing wildly as the profanity flowed more freely. "They leak stories about us constantly. They refuse to protect us from racist attacks. And when we finally said enough is enough, suddenly we're the villains for telling our truth." Colbert's expression had shifted from amused surprise to something harder, more calculating. The comedian in him might have been enjoying the spectacle, but the journalist was sensing blood in the water. "Your truth, though, and this is important, your truth has been contradicted by multiple sources, including people who were actually there for some of these alleged incidents. How do you respond to critics who say you've embellished or outright fabricated some of these claims?" The accusation of lying was apparently the final straw. Markle shot to her feet so quickly that her chair rolled backward, the sudden movement causing several audience members to gasp audibly. Her carefully styled hair was slightly disheveled now. Her makeup couldn't quite hide the flush of anger across her cheeks, and her entire body language radiated barely contained fury. "How dare you?" she hissed, pointing an accusing finger directly at Colbert's face. How fucking dare you sit there and call me a liar? You don't know what you're talking about. You weren't there. You didn't live through what we lived through. For the first time since the interview began, Colbert looked genuinely taken aback by the intensity of her reaction. The studio audience was completely silent now, mesmerized by the train wreck unfolding before their eyes. Camera operators zoomed in instinctively, capturing every detail of what was rapidly becoming one of the most explosive moments in late-night television history. "I'm not calling you a liar," Colbert said, though his tone suggested he might be thinking exactly that. "I'm asking you to address the inconsistencies that multiple journalists and fact-checkers have pointed out in various interviews you and Harry have given. That's not an attack, that's journalism." "Journalism?" Markle let out a bitter laugh that bordered on hysterical. "Is that what you call this character assassination? This isn't journalism, Stephen. This is a fucking hit job, and you know it. You brought me on here under false pretenses just so you could ambush me with this bullshit." The accusation hung heavy in the air. Members of the production team could be seen in the background, clearly unsure whether they should intervene or let this spectacular meltdown continue to unfold. Social media was undoubtedly exploding as clips of the confrontation spread like wildfire across every platform. Colbert straightened in his chair, his own patience finally beginning to show cracks. "Meghan, I asked you standard questions that any interviewer would ask someone who has made the claims you've made publicly. If you can't handle basic scrutiny of your public statements, maybe you shouldn't be making them in the first place." But this calm response only seemed to enrage Markle further. She began pacing behind her chair like a caged animal, her voice rising to near shouting levels as months or perhaps years of pent-up frustration came pouring out in an unstoppable torrent that would lead to an explosive finale no one saw coming. "You know what your problem is, Stephen?" she screamed, her voice echoing through the suddenly cavernous-feeling studio. "You're just another fucking puppet for the establishment. You sit here night after night making your little jokes, thinking you're so clever, but you're just another tool being used to tear down anyone who dares to speak truth to power." The accusation was so over the top, so completely disconnected from reality, that even some audience members began shifting uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't righteous anger anymore. This was someone having a complete breakdown on national television, and everyone in the building could feel it. Colbert's response was measured but firm, his professional demeanor holding strong even as the situation spiraled completely out of control. "Meghan, I think you need to take a breath here. This is supposed to be a conversation, not a therapy session. If you can't handle discussing your public statements without having a meltdown, maybe this interview should end." That suggestion, that she was the one who couldn't handle the pressure, sent Markle into absolute overdrive. She whirled around to face him directly, her eyes blazing with a fury that seemed to consume her entirely. "Oh, you'd love that, wouldn't you? You'd love to be able to say that Meghan Markle couldn't handle the tough questions, that she ran away when things got real. Well, fuck that and fuck you." She slammed her hand down on the desk between them with such force that Colbert's coffee mug jumped, sending liquid splashing across his notes. The audience gasped collectively at the physical aggression. Several people in the front row actually leaned back in their seats, as if afraid they might get caught in the crossfire of whatever was about to happen next. The camera operators were having a field day, capturing every angle of what was rapidly becoming the most dramatic moment in late-night television history. But Markle wasn't done, not even close. As if the hand-slamming had broken some final barrier of self-control, she launched into a tirade that left everyone in the studio stunned into absolute silence. "You want to know the real truth, Stephen? The real fucking truth that nobody wants to talk about?" Her voice had taken on a manic quality now, words tumbling over each other in a rush to get them out. "The royal family is a fucking joke. They're parasites, living off the British taxpayers while pretending to be these noble, dignified figures. And when someone like me comes along, someone who actually gives a shit about making a difference in the world, they can't handle it because it makes them look like the useless relics they really are." The words hung in the air like toxic fumes. Even for someone who had been critical of the royal family in the past, this level of venom was shocking. But she wasn't finished, not by a long shot. "Charles is a weak man who let his mother control his entire life. William is an entitled prick who thinks the world owes him something just because he was born. And don't even get me started on Kate, perfect little Kate who never had an original thought in her fucking head. She was screaming now, spittle flying as she gesticulated wildly. The silence that followed was deafening. Even Colbert, who had seen his share of difficult guests over the years, sat frozen in his chair, clearly unsure how to respond to such an unhinged attack on people who weren't even there to defend themselves. Finally, he found his voice. "Meghan, I think—" "No," she cut him off, her voice cracking with a strain of shouting. "You don't get to think. You don't get to sit there and judge me when you have no fucking clue what it's like to be systematically destroyed by people who smile to your face while they stab you in the back." That's when the security appeared. Two large men in dark suits had materialized from the wings, clearly summoned by someone in the production team who had finally decided this had gone far enough. Their presence seemed to snap Markle back to reality for just a moment, long enough for her to realize exactly how far she had fallen. The look on her face as she saw the security guards was one of pure, unadulterated shock. For the first time since the interview began, she seemed to understand that she had completely lost control, that she had burned every bridge and destroyed any remaining goodwill in the most public way possible. "Don't you fucking touch me," she snarled at the approaching guards, but there was something hollow in her voice now, as if the fight was finally going out of her. "I'm leaving. I'm done with this bullshit." She grabbed her purse from beside her chair with such force that she nearly knocked the chair over entirely. As she turned to storm toward the exit, she paused just long enough to deliver one final blow. "You know what, Stephen? This interview is going to backfire on you in ways you can't even imagine. People are going to see exactly who you really are. Just another privileged white man who can't handle a strong woman telling the truth." Her voice was shaking now. Whether from anger or the realization of what she'd just done, it was impossible to tell. Colbert, showing remarkable composure given everything that had just transpired, simply nodded toward the security guards. "Make sure she gets to her car safely," he said quietly, his voice carrying clearly in the silent studio. As Markle stormed toward the exit, her heels clicking angrily against the floor, she turned back one last time. "This isn't over," she shouted, pointing directly at Colbert. "You haven't heard the last of this." And then she was gone, the studio doors slamming behind her with a resounding bang that seemed to echo through the entire building. The security guards followed her out, leaving behind a studio full of stunned audience members and crew who had just witnessed one of the most spectacular public meltdowns in recent memory. Colbert sat in his chair for a long moment, staring at the doors through which Markle had just exited. Finally, he turned back to his audience, his trademark smirk slowly returning to his face. "Well," he said, his voice breaking the spell that had held the studio captive, "I guess we'll be right back after these messages." As the show cut to commercial break, the audience remained frozen in their seats, still processing what they had just witnessed. Within minutes, clips of the confrontation were spreading across social media like wildfire, with hashtags trending worldwide as viewers tried to make sense of the spectacular implosion they had just witnessed. The interview that was supposed to promote Markle's latest project had instead become a masterclass in how to destroy your own reputation in the most public way possible. And somewhere in the distance, the sound of car doors slamming could be heard as one of the most dramatic exits in television history came to its inevitable conclusion.